George Russell is on the brink of making unwanted history. The Mercedes driver, known for his composed demeanor, may become the first Formula One driver to be fined under the FIA's controversial new swearing regulation. It all started during pre-season testing in Bahrain, when a simple slip of the tongue might cost him thousands. During an interview with Viaplay, Russell reacted to a sudden power cut at the Sakir International Circuit, muttering, "Oh, there's no lights on." On the surface, it was an innocent remark, an instinctive response to an unexpected situation. But under the FIA's newly introduced rule, those words could carry a staggering penalty. A fine of £33,800, €40,000. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. The FIA's revised disciplinary code states that any driver deemed to have caused moral injury or loss to the FIA, its bodies, its members, or its executive officers, and more generally on the interest of motorsport and on the values defended by the FIA, could face severe consequences. And if this so-called offense is repeated, the penalties escalate quickly. £101,400, €120,000 for a third infraction, followed by the unthinkable, a deduction of championship points, or even a 1-month suspension from racing. The enforcement of this rule is part of FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem's ongoing effort to reshape the image of Formula One. His argument that drivers are public figures, role models for younger fans, and should maintain a certain standard of behavior. However, this initiative has ignited outrage across the paddock, with many questioning whether such a strict approach is justified in a sport fueled by raw emotion, intensity, and high stakes. World champion Max Verstappen has been among the most vocal critics. Speaking at the F175 live event in London, he dismissed the regulation as unnecessary and out of touch with the reality of motorsport. "Honestly, I don't even need to say too much, right? Because I think if you just look at everyone's reaction to it, I think that says enough," he remarked. Verstappen, like many of his peers, understands the need for professionalism, but he also recognizes that in the heat of competition, emotions can boil over. "Of course, I understand that you cannot always swear wherever you go, right? I think we all understand that as racing drivers," he continued. "But sometimes, in the heat of the moment, or when you get interviewed when you're in your car and you've just had an adrenaline rush or whatever, sometimes things slip out a little bit." And that's the core of the argument against the FIA's crackdown. Formula One is not a scripted event. It's a brutal, unpredictable battle where drivers push themselves to the absolute limit. In those moments, language is often the last thing on their minds. The sport thrives on its unfiltered, high-adrenaline environment where fans get a raw, unvarnished look at the personalities behind the helmets. Sanitizing that experience risks diluting the very essence of what makes F1 so compelling. Russell, despite finding himself at the center of the controversy, shares a similar stance. Alongside Verstappen and Williams' Alex Albon, he expressed concerns over the rule, highlighting the unrealistic expectation it places on drivers. "Plus, I think we all grew up. Probably most people grew up in school, playing football or sports in general. It happens that you use a swear word, and I think we shouldn't take it so serious, you know." The FIA's decision to enforce such a rule also raises questions about consistency. Formula One has always been a sport governed by strict regulations, but this latest move feels particularly arbitrary. Where does the line get drawn? If a driver swears over the team radio in a moment of frustration, will that be met with a financial penalty? What about impassioned podium celebrations where emotions spill over? And beyond that, why does the FIA believe that a sport rooted in speed, competition, and intense rivalries should be a place where language is policed so aggressively? For many, this latest development is just another example of the FIA's increasing overreach. The governing body has faced criticism in recent years for inconsistent rule enforcement, controversial penalty decisions, and an apparent disconnect from the realities of modern F1. This swearing rule, in particular, has only intensified the scrutiny on Ben Sulayem's leadership. Instead of addressing critical issues, such as improving stewarding consistency, refining track limits enforcement, or ensuring fair competition, the FIA FIA has chosen to focus on a trivial aspect of the sport, alienating drivers and fans alike. The reaction from the F1 community suggests that enforcing this rule will be a challenge. If Russell is fined, it will set a precedent that could quickly spiral into chaos. Imagine a scenario where drivers become hyper-aware of every word they say, second-guessing their natural reactions in interviews and radio messages. The sport risks losing the candid, unscripted moments that make it so thrilling. Fans don't just tune in for the racing. They want to see the personalities, the rivalries, the unfiltered emotions that make F1 drivers more than just athletes. And then there's the broader question. If the FIA is truly concerned about role models in the sport, is swearing really the most pressing issue? This is a championship where aggressive driving tactics, team orders controversies, and off-track political maneuvering are commonplace. The idea that a momentary slip of the tongue is more damaging to the sport's integrity than, say, questionable stewarding decisions or power struggles within teams seems absurd. There's also the matter of selective enforcement. Will this rule be applied equally across the board, or will high-profile drivers like Verstappen, Hamilton, or Leclerc be given more leniency compared to those in midfield or backmarker teams? Motorsport history has shown that subjective rules often lead to favoritism and inconsistency, and this regulation appears ripe for controversy. The coming days will reveal whether the FIA intends to make an example out of Russell. If he is fined, it will mark the beginning of an era where drivers are financially punished for expressing themselves in the most human way possible. And if he isn't, it could expose the rule as little more than an empty threat, another misguided attempt at enforcing an unnecessary code of conduct. What is clear is that this rule has done nothing but fuel resentment towards the FIA's leadership. Ben Sulayem's push for stricter conduct regulations has been met with resistance, and this swearing penalty is just the latest flashpoint in an ongoing battle between the governing body and the drivers. If history has taught us anything, it's that Formula One's greatest figures have never been silent. From Ayrton Senna's impassioned criticisms of race officials to Lewis Hamilton's outspoken advocacy for social justice, the sport thrives on its personalities as much as its performances on track. Stifling that under the guise of professionalism threatens to strip F1 of its authenticity. Russell's fate now rests in the FIA's hands. Will they truly follow through with this rule, or will the backlash force them to reconsider? The clock is ticking, and the decision could have far-reaching implications for the future of driver expression in Formula One. One thing is certain: if this fine is imposed, it won't just be Russell paying the price. The entire sport will feel the weight of a regulation that prioritizes censorship over competition. And in a world where F1 is constantly evolving, the last thing it needs is a governing body more focused on policing words than fostering the spectacle that has captivated millions for decades. Russell's situation has put the FIA under intense scrutiny as fans and analysts dissect the logic behind the crackdown. If the governing body follows through with a fine, it risks alienating not only drivers, but also a significant portion of the sport's audience. The pushback from within the paddock is already fierce, with some questioning whether the FIA has lost sight of its priorities. Even if the rule is enforced inconsistently, the damage has been done. Drivers now know they are being watched more closely than ever before. This could create an environment where self-censorship becomes the norm, eroding the raw emotion that makes Formula One so compelling. Fans tune in for the drama, the rivalries, and the human element behind the visor. A sterile, overly regulated sport would be a step in the wrong direction. And what happens if another driver, perhaps one more outspoken than Russell, deliberately challenges the rule? Will the FIA be forced to backtrack under overwhelming pressure, or will they double down, risking an all-out revolt from the grid? The answer could shape the power dynamic between drivers and the sport's regulators for years to come. For now, all eyes are on the FIA's next move. Will they send a message that driver conduct is non-negotiable, or will they realize that controlling natural reactions in a high-stakes sport is an exercise in futility? Whatever the outcome, Russell's momentary slip of the tongue has sparked a debate far bigger than just one fine. It's about the very essence of Formula One itself.